The last bell echoed through the narrow hallways of Jefferson High, its metallic ring fading into the hum of teenage voices and shuffling feet. Mark Evans stood by the window of his classroom, watching the late autumn sun slip beneath the gray edge of the horizon. Outside, the air carried the crisp bite of November in Richmond, Virginia. Fallen leaves scattered across the parking lot like brittle pieces of old paper, curling at the edges as if time itself had worn them thin. He gathered a stack of essays from his desk, sliding them into his leather satchel. "You'd think grading would get easier after 15 years, he murmured, his tone half amusement, half weariness. The sound of lockers slamming echoed down the hall. Lisa Monroe, the English teacher next door, leaned into his doorway. "You're still here? School ended an hour ago." Mark smiled faintly. "You know me. I like to linger." She crossed her arms, teasing. "You like to avoid your empty apartment. That's what you mean." "Maybe." His voice softened, betraying the truth she'd hinted at. The divorce papers had been finalized just 3 months earlier, and the quiet that filled his house had grown heavier with every passing week. Lisa's expression shifted, empathy replacing humor. "You should come to the staff dinner Friday. You need people around, Mark." He gave a slow nod, though his eyes drifted toward the window again. "Maybe I will." Outside, the last few students ran across the lot, their laughter bright against the dimming sky. Mark locked his classroom door, the click of the latch sounding almost final. As he walked through the parking lot, the streetlights flickered on, small halos of yellow against the dusk. His old blue Ford sedan waited beneath a sycamore tree, covered in a thin layer of fallen leaves. He brushed them off absently before unlocking the door. Across the street, a car engine idled. He glanced toward it but saw only headlights reflecting off wet pavement. He sat inside, started the engine, and exhaled slowly. The radio came alive with soft static before finding a station playing Bruce Hornsby's The Way It Is. Richmond traffic murmured in the distance, and for a moment the night felt still, almost peaceful. He thought about his students, about the essay from a boy named Tommy Reeves, who'd written about wanting to escape his father's temper. Mark had underlined a sentence in red ink. "I just want someone to believe me." He rubbed his eyes, a faint ache pressing behind them. Teaching had never just been a job to him. It was a promise. A car door shut somewhere behind him. He looked into the rearview mirror, nothing but shadows. He shook his head, smiled faintly at his own nerves, and shifted into drive. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, clearing the thin mist forming on the glass. But the quiet stretched too long. The same car still idled behind him, its headlights steady, unblinking. He hesitated, a small chill crawling up his neck. Then, from the darkness, a flicker of movement. Too fast, too close. The night broke with the sharp crack of a gunshot. If you want to uncover how truth can sleep for decades in plain sight, stay with us. Subscribe and follow this story until the very end. Detective Sam Dillard arrived at the scene just after midnight. The parking lot was cordoned off, the rain still fresh on the pavement. Flashing red and blue lights painted the wet ground, reflecting against the old Ford sedan where Mark Evans's lifeless body rested behind the wheel. His glasses lay cracked on the passenger seat, the smell of gunpowder still faint in the air. "Single shot to the chest," the coroner said quietly. "Close range." Dillard nodded, his jaw tight. "Anything missing?" "Wallet's here. Watch too. Doesn't look like a robbery." Detective Ray Harper joined him, coffee in hand, his tie crooked and his eyes heavy from being called out of bed. Who the hell would shoot a schoolteacher in his car? That's what we're here to find out. They moved carefully around the vehicle. The driver's side window was shattered, glass scattered inside and out. Dillard crouched, studying the ground. Tire marks led away from the scene but faded into the wet asphalt. "One shot, clean, no panic. Someone knew what they were doing," he said. "Or someone who got lucky," Harper countered. Dillard stood and glanced toward the dark stretch of trees near the lot. The faint hum of the James River carried through the cold air. "No witnesses." "None so far, but we'll check the nearby houses." Someone had to hear something. By morning, the story had already made its way through Richmond's news cycle. Local teacher found dead in apparent shooting. At Jefferson High, the news spread through whispers and tears. Lisa Monroe sat in the principal's office, her hands trembling as she spoke to the detectives. He was good. Too good for something like this to happen. Mark didn't have enemies. Dillard flipped through his notepad. "Did you notice anything unusual lately? Anyone hanging around the school?" She hesitated. "There was a car." A blue one. Mark mentioned once that someone had been following him after work. He said it was probably nothing. Did he describe who was driving it? Harper asked. No, just that it made him uneasy. Dillard's brow furrowed. Uneasy enough to report it. Lisa shook her head. He hated making trouble. Said the police had enough real problems. Later that day, Dillard walked through Mark's empty classroom. The faint scent of chalk and old books lingered. Essays were stacked neatly on his desk. One paper caught Dillard's eye. A student had written, "Sometimes silence is safer than truth." He felt a chill run through him. "Anything," Harper called from the doorway. "Just questions," Dillard replied. The rain began again, soft and steady against the windows. Richmond in late autumn always seemed to hold its breath during storms, as if the air itself waited for something to break. As Dillard stood there looking at the photo of Mark and his students pinned to the corkboard, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. Something about this man's death felt deliberate, personal, but the motive, whatever it was, remained just out of reach. And somewhere in the quiet city, the person who had pulled the trigger was still awake, watching the headlines unfold. The morning after the funeral, Jefferson High felt heavier than ever. The hallways that once carried the chatter of students now echoed with a strange, uneasy quiet. Posters for the upcoming football game hung limp on the walls, ignored. Every conversation seemed to pause when Detective Sam Dillard walked by. In the teacher's lounge, Lisa Monroe sat alone, stirring her coffee without drinking it. The bitter smell filled the air. When Dillard entered, she looked up with tired eyes. "They're saying things about him," she whispered. "What kind of things?" That maybe he wasn't as perfect as everyone thought, that he was hiding something. Her voice trembled slightly. Anger and disbelief mixed together. Dillard leaned against the counter. "Rumors start fast when people don't have answers. We're still looking for the truth, not gossip." Lisa nodded, but her expression remained tense. Mark didn't deserve this. He wasn't the kind of man who lived a double life. "Sometimes people surprise you," Dillard said quietly. Across the hall, Harper interviewed a group of students in the library. Their faces were pale, their eyes red. "We just want to help," one girl said, clutching her notebook. "Mr. Evans was the only teacher who really listened to us." Another student, a tall boy with restless hands, hesitated before speaking. "I saw him last week after practice. He was talking to someone in a blue car. I didn't see the face, but it looked like he was arguing." "Arguing how?" Harper asked. The boy shrugged, like he was mad, but scared too. The detail sent a shiver through Harper's mind. When he relayed it to Dillard, the older detective's expression hardened. "That car again," he muttered. "Same color, same mystery." Later that afternoon, Lisa stopped by Mark's classroom to collect his personal things. The door creaked open, and for a moment it felt as if time had stopped. His handwriting still filled the whiteboard. History doesn't forget, it waits. Papers were stacked neatly on his desk, but among them she found a small, folded envelope. No name, just a single line written across the front. "I'm sorry for what's coming." Her breath caught. She stared at the words until they blurred, then brought the note straight to Dillard. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably Mark's, but the message raised more questions than it answered. "Looks like he knew something," Dillard said. "Or someone." Lisa's voice was barely audible. "Do you think he was in trouble?" Dillard didn't respond right away. "I think Mark Evans saw something he couldn't unsee." That night, the detectives sat in their office, files spread across the desk, the hum of the fluorescent lights pressing into the silence. "Nothing about this feels random," Harper said. Dillard nodded slowly. "No, but until we find who that letter was meant for, all we've got are whispers." Outside, rain tapped against the window pane, soft, steady, relentless. And somewhere beyond the storm, the truth waited, silent but alive. By the time December rolled around, the story of Mark Evans had begun to fade from Richmond's headlines. The city moved at its usual rhythm, Christmas lights hanging from porches, the hum of traffic over the James River Bridge. But for those who had known him, the quiet felt unnatural. It wasn't grief anymore. It was unease, the kind that creeps into the corners of small-town life when something doesn't fit. Detective Sam Dillard sat in his car outside Jefferson High, watching the fog drift over the football field. The investigation had stalled. No weapon, no fingerprints, no witnesses. Every lead they'd chased had circled back into smoke. Harper climbed in, dropping a half-empty cup of coffee into the holder. "Captain's ready to close it," he said. "He's calling it a random act. Says we've spent enough hours chasing shadows." Dillard's jaw tightened. "Random acts don't leave letters." Harper looked out the window. "You think the note means something more than guilt?" "I think it means Mark Evans knew someone wanted to hurt him, and he didn't want to say who." Inside the school, teachers avoided eye contact when the detectives walked the halls. Everyone seemed afraid to speak, as if talking about Mark might invite trouble. When Dillard questioned the janitor, the man simply shrugged. He kept to himself. Didn't cause problems. Folks just want to move on. But Dillard couldn't. He returned to Mark's desk again, reading the same essays, the same fragments of handwriting that seemed to whisper clues he couldn't quite catch. One essay in particular, Tommy Reeves's, lingered in his thoughts. There was pain in that boy's words, a kind of raw honesty that made him uneasy. At the Rusty Lantern Diner that evening, Lisa Monroe met the detectives. The small place smelled of coffee and fried onions, the booths crowded with locals pretending not to stare. "People are talking," Lisa said quietly. "They say Mark was having an affair, that it was with someone married, that maybe that's why." Dillard leaned forward. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said without hesitation. "He wasn't that kind of man. But people in this town, when they can't understand something, they invent stories until it feels right." Harper sighed. "And those stories can bury a case faster than any killer." Lisa lowered her voice. "He was trying to protect someone, I'm sure of it. The way he looked at people sometimes, like he knew more than he could say." When she left, Dillard sat for a long time, staring at the rain streaking down the diner window. Outside, the town seemed ordinary again. Families driving home, lights glowing softly in the distance, but he could feel it in his gut. Something was wrong beneath the surface. Back at headquarters, he opened the case file one more time. The photographs, the reports, the handwriting, all of it incomplete. He scribbled 3 words across the final page. Not random. Connected. He didn't know how yet, but he could feel the truth waiting, buried deep in Richmond's silence, guarded by people too afraid to speak. By the spring of 1991, the murder of Mark Evans had become a headline buried beneath newer crimes, fresher tragedies. What had once been a citywide shock now existed only in whispers and half-remembered details. Detective Sam Dillard still carried the file in his briefcase, a weight that refused to leave him. Every now and then, he'd open it at his desk, staring at the same black-and-white photo of Mark's car, the cracked glasses on the seat, the unanswered questions frozen in time. Harper had long since stopped believing there'd be a break. "You can't solve ghosts, Sam," he'd said more than once. "Sometimes you just have to let them rest." But Dillard couldn't. There was something about Mark Evans, the integrity, the quiet compassion everyone spoke of, that made the randomness of it all impossible to accept. He'd replayed every lead, every interview, until the details began to blur. The blue sedan, the anonymous letter, the note written in Mark's hand, "I'm sorry for what's coming." And yet every path led nowhere. No suspects, no fingerprints, no weapon, just silence. In early April, Dillard received the official order, case classified as inactive. He signed the document reluctantly, pressing his pen so hard it tore through the page. The words "cold case" felt like a personal failure. At Jefferson High, Mark's classroom was cleared out for good. The board was scrubbed clean, his books boxed up and sent to storage. Lisa Monroe stood in the doorway one last time, her eyes tracing the faint outlines of chalk still visible under the light. She whispered, "You deserved better than this, Mark." That evening, she stopped by Dillard's office, a paper bag in her hands. "I found this while packing the storage room," she said. Inside was a framed photo, Mark standing in front of his students, smiling, sunlight pouring through the windows behind him. Dillard turned it over. On the back, Mark had written a line in neat, small handwriting. "Truth never dies, even when no one is looking for it." Dillard exhaled slowly. He really believed that, didn't he? Lisa nodded. He lived by it. Maybe that's why he died. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain began against the window, soft and rhythmic. When she left, Dillard stayed behind, the photograph still in his hand. He slipped it into the cold case file before locking it away in the cabinet, the key hanging loosely between his fingers. The office lights flickered above him, humming with that constant fluorescent buzz that filled every late night he'd spent chasing the truth. Years passed. Dillard retired, moved south to a quieter life. Lisa transferred to another district, but every autumn she found herself thinking of Mark, the way he used to talk about history, not as something written, but as something waiting to be found again. And somewhere in Richmond, beneath layers of time and neglect, the file bearing Mark Evans's name sat untouched in the archives, gathering dust. The ink had faded, but the truth inside it hadn't. It simply waited, patient and silent for someone to look again. The year was 2021. Richmond had changed. New buildings stood where old diners used to be, and the skyline gleamed with glass instead of brick. But beneath the polished surface, the city's memory remained the same. Inside the basement of police headquarters, boxes lined the walls in neat, forgotten rows. Dust coated the names of the dead. One of those names, faded and handwritten in black ink, read Mark Evans, 1989. Detective Claire Bishop opened the box carefully, brushing off years of neglect. She had been assigned to the cold case unit for less than 6 months, but this one drew her in the moment she read the file summary. High school teacher shot inside his car. No witnesses, no motive, no closure. The simplicity of it bothered her. It felt too empty, too unresolved. Her partner, Detective Luis Mendoza, leaned over her shoulder. That one's ancient. Dillard worked it back in the day. They said it went nowhere. Claire glanced at the faded photo inside the file. Mark's car under a grey sky, his glasses on the seat. Then maybe they stopped too soon. The evidence bag contained cigarette butts, a few fibres from the driver's seat, and a yellowing police report. Claire studied the report closely. Handwritten notes in the margins, Dillard's neat script underlining phrases like blue sedan and letter found at scene. Back then, DNA testing was limited, Claire said. If there's biological material on these, we might get something now. Mendoza nodded. You think it's worth it after 30 years? I think truth doesn't expire, she replied, sealing the evidence bag for transfer. That afternoon, she visited the old Richmond archives, scrolling through microfilm reels of 1989 newspapers. The headline appeared just as she remembered it from the file: Local Teacher Slain. Police Baffled. Underneath, a grainy photo of Lisa Monroe, her eyes red and tired. Claire wrote the name down. By evening, she had tracked Lisa to a modest suburban home on the outskirts of town. The woman was in her 60s now, her hair silver but her eyes still sharp. Detective Bishop, Claire introduced herself softly. I'm reopening Mark Evans's case. For a moment, Lisa said nothing. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of pain and something like relief. I didn't think anyone ever would, she finally whispered. Claire studied her. You were close to him. Yes, too close maybe. Mark was different. He cared more than most people thought was safe. Safe? Claire asked. Lisa hesitated, her gaze drifting to a framed photo on the mantel, Mark smiling among students. He tried to do the right thing, and sometimes, in this town, that's the most dangerous thing you can do. Claire left with more questions than answers. Outside, the evening light spilled over the quiet Richmond streets, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. She looked down at the old case file in her hands and felt it stir with something alive again. 32 years had passed, but the silence around Mark Evans was beginning to crack. The following week, Detective Claire Bishop sat in her office as the rain pressed softly against the windows. The lab results had not yet returned, but she couldn't let the silence stall her. She spread the old case files across her desk again, tracing the faded ink of Dillard's notes. His handwriting carried the weight of frustration, each line a dead end that had haunted him until retirement. When Mendoza entered, holding 2 coffees, he said, "You've been here since 7, you're obsessed." She accepted the cup without looking up. Dillard missed something. He had heart, but not the tools. You think new tech will fix what 30 years couldn't? I think time changes people, Claire said. Someone who stayed silent then might talk now. She decided to start with the only living witness who had been close to Mark, Lisa Monroe. They met again that afternoon at a quiet cafe near Belle Isle, not far from where Mark's car had been found decades earlier. The river outside moved slowly, grey and wide under the overcast sky. Lisa stirred her tea, her hands trembling slightly. "It's strange," she said softly. "Every year around this time I dream about that night, the phone call, the sirens, and the feeling that I already knew it would end that way." Claire watched her carefully. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated. Mark wasn't just a teacher. He carried other people's burdens. Students came to him with things they couldn't tell anyone else. He protected them, even when it meant crossing lines. Crossing lines, how? Lisa's eyes flicked to the window. He reported something to the administration once. I never knew what, but after that, things changed. He got quiet. He started looking over his shoulder. Do you think someone wanted him silenced? Claire asked. I think he believed telling the truth cost him more than staying quiet ever would. The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken. When Claire returned to the station, she pulled the original witness statements again. Most were brief, predictable. Students describing an admired teacher, parents expressing shock. But one name stood out: Tommy Reeves. The same boy whose essay Dillard had underlined decades ago. The note said Tommy had transferred schools shortly after the murder. Claire underlined the name, feeling the pulse of the case shift. Later that night, she drove past Jefferson High. The building stood mostly unchanged, its brick walls darkened by rain, its windows glowing faintly from the janitor's lights inside. She imagined Mark walking these same halls 32 years earlier, carrying the quiet burden of whatever truth he'd discovered. She whispered to herself, "You tried to protect someone, didn't you, Mark?" The wipers kept a slow rhythm against the windshield as she sat there, thinking of the woman who still dreamed about that night, and the boy who might hold the key to it all. For the first time, the past didn't feel so distant. It felt alive, pressing against the edges of the present, waiting to be heard. The lab report landed on Claire Bishop's desk early Monday morning. The envelope was thin, stamped forensic analysis, priority review. She slit it open carefully, her pulse quickening as she read the summary. There was a match, partial, but enough to raise hope. A male DNA profile had been recovered from one of the cigarette butts found near Mark Evans's car. The database returned a connection to an extended family in Virginia, the Reeves family. She stared at the name, her pen tapping against the desk. "Reeves," she murmured. "That can't be coincidence." Mendoza looked over her shoulder. "You think it's connected to that student, Tommy Reeves?" Claire nodded slowly. "Too many threads lead back to him. We find Tommy. We might finally see the shape of what happened." By afternoon, she'd tracked down an address in rural Chesterfield County. The property was old, a farmhouse surrounded by fields gone brown from the cold. A woman answered the door, grey hair pulled back, her eyes weary but alert. "Mrs. Reeves?" Claire asked, flashing her badge. The woman hesitated before opening the door wider. "I haven't seen the police since my boys were kids. What's this about?" "I'm investigating a case from 1989. Your son Tommy attended Jefferson High School that year." At the mention of his name, the woman's face tightened. "Tommy's had a hard life. He's in the state correctional facility now, has been for years." Claire exchanged a glance with Mendoza. "Can you tell me if he ever mentioned a teacher named Mark Evans?" Her voice dropped. "I remember that man. Tommy liked him, said he was one of the few adults who listened." She hesitated, then added quietly, "But after Mr. Evans died, Tommy stopped talking. About school, about everything." On the drive back, Mendoza spoke first. "So we've got a DNA trace tied to the Reeves family and a student who shut down right after the murder. Tommy's in prison. If anyone still knows what happened that night, it's him," Claire said. They arranged the interview for the following day. The correctional facility loomed grey and sterile under the harsh winter sun. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. When Tommy Reeves was led into the small visitation room, Claire was struck by how different he looked from the photo in the old student file. Mid-40s now, broad-shouldered, face hardened by years of confinement. "Detective Bishop," she said, sitting across from him. "I'm here about Mark Evans." For a second, his expression didn't change. Then his eyes flickered, just once. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," he said quietly. "You knew him. Everyone knew him. He cared too much. That's what got him killed." Claire leaned forward. "You think you know who did it?" Tommy looked down at his hands, his voice low. "You're chasing ghosts, detective. The truth won't change what it cost." Claire studied him, the pulse in her throat steady but strong. "Maybe not," she said, "but it's time someone finally tells it." For the first time, he looked her in the eye, and in that silence, she knew the past had just cracked open. Tommy Reeves sat across from Detective Claire Bishop, his posture tense but controlled. The sound of the security door locking behind him echoed through the concrete room. Years of confinement had shaped him into someone cautious with every word, but his eyes still carried something restless, an unspoken burden. Claire placed the old photo of Mark Evans on the table. "You said he cared too much. What did you mean by that?" Tommy stared at the picture, his jaw tightening. "He saw things he shouldn't have. Tried to fix them when he didn't have the power to." "Fix what?" she pressed. He leaned back in his chair. You think you're the first to come asking questions? I told the cops back then. Nothing I said mattered. Nobody wanted to hear what a kid from my side of town had to say. Claire kept her tone even. I'm not them. Things are different now. You can tell me. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice lowered. Mr. Evans helped me once. My dad was drinking again. Things at home were bad. Evans saw the bruises. He tried to get social services involved, said he'd talk to the principal. But word got out. People didn't like teachers getting into family business back then. Claire watched him closely. You think that's why he was killed? Tommy's eyes darkened. No, that was just where it started. After that, he started meeting with people after school, late. He said it was about doing what's right. But I think it scared him. He stopped smiling, stopped trusting people. Did you ever see who he met? Tommy hesitated, then shook his head. A car would pull up sometimes, a dark blue sedan. I saw it a few times, same spot near the field. I thought maybe it was someone from the school. I asked him once and he told me to forget it. Claire's pulse quickened. Did you recognize the person in the car? He looked at her sharply. You think I'd still be sitting here if I had? There was defiance in his tone, but underneath it, fear. Claire sensed the weight of secrets that had aged with him. Tommy, she said carefully, the DNA from that scene matches your family. Not you exactly, but someone related. Do you know who it could be? His expression shifted, just slightly, enough for her to notice. You said it was a long time ago, he muttered. People do things to protect family. Who are you protecting? Claire asked quietly. Tommy exhaled, his hands curling into fists on the table. You don't understand, he said, almost pleading. What happened that night wasn't supposed to go that way. He wasn't supposed to die. Claire leaned forward. Then help me understand. Who pulled the trigger? Tommy looked away, his silence stretching thin and dangerous. Finally, he whispered, Wasn't me. But it's someone who's lived free a long time. The guard opened the door to escort him out. But before stepping through, Tommy turned back. Detective, be careful digging into this. Some graves don't want to be opened. And with that, he was gone, leaving the truth trembling in the air, half-spoken but alive. Claire Bishop couldn't shake Tommy Reeves's words. It wasn't supposed to go that way. They echoed in her mind as she reviewed the files late into the night, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. She replayed every detail, every note from the old reports, until one name kept surfacing. Coach Alan Briggs. He had been the school's athletic director in 1989, a man praised by the community for his dedication and charm. But Dillard's old notes contained a single line about him, scribbled in the margin. Transferred unexpectedly April '89, no record why. Claire circled it twice. Transfers didn't happen quietly back then, not without a reason. The next morning she pulled his personnel file from the district archives. Inside were glowing letters of recommendation and spotless evaluations, too spotless. But one document stood out. A confidential report addressed to the superintendent, heavily redacted. The visible parts mentioned inappropriate conduct and disciplinary review. The date was 1 month before Mark Evans's death. Mendoza leaned over her shoulder. Looks like someone cleaned this up. Or buried it, she replied. She tracked down Briggs's last known address, a small coastal town 2 hours away. The man was retired now, 71, living quietly off a teacher's pension. When they arrived, he greeted them with a polite but guarded smile. Detectives, he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. What can I help you with? We're reopening the Mark Evans case, Claire said evenly. You worked with him at Jefferson High. Briggs's expression barely flickered. Tragic business, good man, shame it was never solved. Records show you left the school a month before he was killed, she continued. Care to tell me why? He gave a thin smile. Personal reasons. My wife was ill back then. Your file mentions a disciplinary review, Mendoza added. Briggs's gaze sharpened. Old rumors. Nothing ever came of it. Claire leaned forward slightly. Did Mark Evans have anything to do with those rumors? His pause was small, but enough. You're implying a lot, Detective. I'm asking, she said quietly. Briggs looked past her, his tone cooling. You dig through old dirt long enough, you'll find everyone's hands are dirty. Including your heroes. Claire felt a flicker of anger, but she kept her voice steady. Mark Evans tried to protect someone. I think you know who that was. Briggs stood abruptly, signaling the interview was over. We're done here. Back in the car, Mendoza exhaled sharply. He's hiding something. Claire nodded. And I think Evans found out what it was. She drove in silence, the late afternoon sun bleeding orange over the highway. Her mind raced through the possibilities, an accusation, a cover-up, a man silenced for exposing the wrong truth. She thought of Tommy's warning, some graves don't want to be opened, but the door was open now and she wasn't going to close it. As they passed the Richmond city limits sign, Claire said quietly, "We're not dealing with a murder anymore. We're dealing with a system that made it disappear." That night, Claire Bishop couldn't sleep. The image of Alan Briggs's cold, measured expression stayed with her. She sat at her kitchen table with the old files spread out before her, the clock ticking past midnight. Something about his tone had felt rehearsed, too clean. People didn't stay that calm unless they'd practiced their lies for decades. She flipped through the police logs again, this time focusing on background names, janitors, maintenance workers, substitute staff. That's when she found it. Ethan Reeves, custodial assistant, Jefferson High, 1988-1989. Her pen froze mid-air. The surname, Reeves. Her mind connected the dots with sharp precision. Tommy Reeves had been a student then, his brother Ethan an employee. The DNA match to the Reeves family suddenly made sense. By morning, Claire had tracked Ethan's last known address to a small trailer park on the outskirts of Henrico County. She and Mendoza arrived just after sunrise, the winter air biting against their faces. The man who opened the door was in his 50s, hair grey at the temples, his eyes wary. "Ethan Reeves?" Claire asked, showing her badge. He hesitated, then nodded. "What's this about?" "We're investigating the murder of Mark Evans. You worked at Jefferson High when he died." His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough to confirm her suspicion. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "Why dig it up now?" "Because we finally can," Claire replied. "Your DNA came up as a partial match from the scene. Care to explain that?" Ethan's face drained of color. Look, I don't know how. Maybe I smoked near his car once after work." "You expect me to believe that?" He ran a hand over his face, his breathing shallow. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Claire's voice softened but stayed firm. "Then tell me what was supposed to happen." Ethan looked past her, toward the open field behind the trailers. "Briggs said we just had to scare him. That Evans was making trouble for everyone, trying to ruin good people's lives with lies. I didn't even have a gun." "I swear I didn't." "Briggs told you to confront him?" He nodded weakly. "Said he'd be there, said no one would get hurt. But when I got to the parking lot, someone else was already there. I saw the flash, heard the shot. By the time I ran up, it was over. And Briggs, he told me to keep quiet or I'd lose everything." Mendoza crossed his arms. "And you did. You kept quiet for 30 years. Ethan's voice cracked. "You think I haven't lived with that every damn day?" Claire studied him, the weight of decades pressing between them. "Where is Briggs now?" she asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "You won't find him in your files anymore. People like him, they don't leave paper trails." Claire exchanged a look with Mendoza. The pieces were finally aligning, each truth darker than the one before. As they drove away, the sun rose weakly through the morning fog, and Claire knew one thing with absolute certainty. Mark Evans hadn't died because he was in the wrong place. He died because he stood up for the right thing. The road leading out of Richmond stretched long and empty as Claire Bishop drove toward the town where Alan Briggs now lived. The air was thick with tension, the kind that builds before a storm. Ethan Reeves's confession played over and over in her head. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Those words had burned through her sleep, leaving her restless and certain. This was the moment to end it. Mendoza sat in the passenger seat silent, his fingers drumming against his leg. "You really think Briggs will talk?" "He doesn't have a choice anymore," Claire said. "Ethan gave us enough to bring him in for questioning. Whether he knows it or not, the truth's already caught up to him." They found Briggs at his lakeside property, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking as though he had been expecting them. His calmness unsettled Claire. People who carried guilt usually hid from the past. Briggs seemed to welcome it. "Detectives," he greeted evenly. "I suppose this isn't a social visit. We need to talk about Mark Evans," Claire said, "and about Ethan Reeves." Briggs's eyes flickered, just a fraction, but his smile remained. "Ah, Ethan. Poor boy always did have a weak stomach for hard choices." Claire stepped closer. "He told us everything about the night Evans was killed, about how you sent him there to scare Mark into silence." Briggs exhaled slowly, setting his cup down. "Silence is such a relative term, Detective. Evans was trying to destroy lives with rumors. I simply asked someone to remind him that actions have consequences. Remind him, Mendoza cut in. You orchestrated his death. Briggs turned toward him, voice calm but sharp. No. I told Ethan to talk to him. Nothing more. But people like Evans, men who meddle in matters that don't concern them, sometimes meet unfortunate ends. Claire felt the pulse in her throat quicken. You covered for someone that night. Who pulled the trigger, Briggs? He stared at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You've read the file. You already know. But proving it? That's the hard part. She took a step forward. We have DNA, a confession, and your connection to both men. That's enough. His tone darkened. Enough for headlines, maybe. Not for truth. Claire's patience thinned. You ruined lives to protect yourself. Mark Evans tried to do what was right, and you let him die for it. For the first time, Briggs's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing with restrained fury. He would have destroyed everything, the school, reputations, families. I did what was necessary. Necessary, she repeated, disgusted. You justified murder. He leaned forward, his voice low. Justice, detective, is just another word for control, and I've been in control for a long time. Before Claire could respond, Mendoza's phone buzzed. He glanced down, his eyes widening. Ethan's in custody. He just signed a statement naming Briggs as the man who ordered the hit. Briggs froze, his calm finally breaking. Claire met his stare. It's over, Mr. Briggs. He didn't answer. He just looked out at the lake, silent, motionless, like a man realizing the past had finally caught up to him. News of Alan Briggs's arrest spread through Richmond like a ghost resurfacing. For over 3 decades, his name had been untouchable, whispered about, never questioned. Now it appeared on every local headline. Former coach charged in 1989, murder of teacher Mark Evans. Detective Claire Bishop stood outside the precinct, watching reporters gather by the steps. She wasn't seeking recognition. The truth was satisfaction enough, though it carried a heaviness she hadn't expected. Justice never felt clean. It was more like reopening an old wound to let it finally heal. Inside, Ethan Reeves sat in an interview room, his hands trembling as he signed his final statement. I told you everything, he said quietly. I kept it inside all these years because I was scared. Briggs said if I talked, my family would pay. Claire nodded, her tone soft. You did the right thing now, that's what matters. Ethan's eyes glistened. Does it? Mark's still gone. I should have stopped it. There's no changing what happened, she replied. But you can stop it from staying buried. When she left the room, Mendoza was waiting in the hallway. The DA's moving fast. They want to make this public before Briggs's lawyers can spin it. Claire exhaled. Good. People need to know the truth. Truth's messy, Mendoza said, shaking his head. Some folks around here won't thank you for dragging it out. She met his eyes. I didn't do it for them. Later that evening, Claire drove through the quiet streets of Richmond. The autumn wind carried the smell of rain and burning leaves. She stopped by Jefferson High, the place where everything had started and ended. The building looked smaller now, almost fragile under the streetlights. Lisa Monroe was there, waiting by the front steps. I saw the news, she said. Her voice trembled between relief and disbelief. It's really over? As over as it can be, Claire answered. Briggs will face trial, Ethan's testifying. The department's calling it solved. Lisa looked toward the darkened windows of the school. You know, for years I blamed myself. I thought if I'd pushed harder, maybe they would have listened. Claire shook her head. You kept his memory alive. Without that, no one would have cared enough to reopen the file. Lisa smiled faintly. Mark used to say truth is like a river. You can dam it for a while, but it'll always find a way through. They stood in silence, the sound of distant thunder rolling across the sky. As Lisa turned to leave, she looked back. He'd be proud of you, detective. When Claire finally returned to her car, she sat for a long moment, letting the stillness settle. She thought about the people whose silence had allowed a good man's murder to vanish into time, about the generations that had passed without knowing what really happened. Justice had come, but it carried a price, one paid in years of guilt, loss, and unspoken truth. And though the case was closed on paper, the echoes of Mark Evans's life lingered still, in every hallway, every memory, and every question left unanswered. The trial of Alan Briggs began 6 months later in the Richmond Circuit Court. The city buzzed with anticipation, every headline revisiting the murder of Mark Evans, a man forgotten by time, now finally remembered through justice. The courthouse steps were lined with cameras, reporters shouting questions, flashes cutting through the grey morning air. Detective Claire Bishop took her seat in the back row, not as a witness that day, but as someone who needed to see it end. Briggs sat at the defense table, older now, his confidence stripped away. The arrogance that once defined him had hardened into something quieter, resignation, maybe fear. Ethan Reeves took the stand first. His voice shook, but his words were clear. He told me to scare Evans, said the man was spreading lies that could ruin lives. I didn't know it would go that far, but he knew what was coming. Briggs's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Ethan's confession, backed by DNA evidence and corroborated with decades-old notes, painted a picture no defense could erase. When the prosecution displayed Mark Evans's final letter, "I'm sorry for what's coming," the courtroom fell silent. Lisa Monroe was called next. Her testimony was steady, though her hands trembled as she spoke. Mark wasn't a man who sought conflict. He only wanted to protect his students. He believed truth should never be silenced, no matter how dangerous it was. When the closing arguments ended, Claire stepped outside. The wind carried a faint chill, the same kind of weather that had followed Mark home the night he died. She watched the clouds move over the James River and thought about everything the town had buried, how easy it was to forget, how hard it was to remember. Hours later, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed across the room. Briggs didn't look up, didn't protest. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, his mask of power finally gone. As the courtroom emptied, Lisa approached Claire. "It's strange," she said quietly. "After all these years, I thought this would feel like victory." "It's not victory," Claire replied. "It's peace, the kind that costs something." Lisa nodded. "Mark would have liked you. You remind me of him." That night, Claire returned to the precinct to file her final report. The cold case file, now marked closed, sat on her desk. She flipped through its yellowed pages one last time before placing it back into storage. Mendoza stopped by her door. "You ever wonder how many more files like that are sitting back there waiting?" Claire smiled faintly. "Enough to keep us busy for a lifetime." He left her with a nod, and she turned off the desk lamp. The room fell into shadow except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Mark Evans's story had ended, but the truth he died for had not. It had simply waited, patient, quiet, and resilient, until someone was willing to listen again. And in that silence, Richmond finally remembered what justice was supposed to sound like. Spring returned to Richmond with its soft rain and slow light, washing over a city that had changed in quiet, invisible ways. At Jefferson High, the hallways smelled of floor wax and chalk dust, just as they had decades before. But in the old history classroom, something new stood against the far wall, a framed plaque beneath a photograph of Mark Evans. It read, "A teacher who believed truth should never stay buried." Students passed it every morning, some pausing to read, others simply moving on. For most, he was just a name from the past. But for those who remembered him, for Lisa Monroe, for the families, and for Detective Claire Bishop, he had become something more enduring than a case. Lisa stood there now, older but steady, her hand resting against the frame. "Took long enough," she murmured. The sound of young voices from the hallway filled the air, the same rhythm Mark had once loved, the noise of life continuing. Claire approached from behind, holding 2 cups of coffee. "They did a good job," she said softly. Lisa smiled faintly. He'd probably hate the attention. Mark never cared about recognition. He just wanted people to do the right thing. Claire nodded. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." For a while, neither spoke. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, streaking across the old desks. Lisa looked at Claire. "You know, when I first met him, I thought he was too idealistic for this place. He used to say history wasn't about facts, it was about choices, the ones that define us when no one's watching." Claire smiled. "Sounds like he was right." Lisa turned back to the photograph. "He believed the truth would outlive us all. I guess he was right about that too." Later that day, Claire visited the Richmond Police Archives one last time. The Evans file, now sealed and labeled resolved, rested neatly on the shelf. She ran her fingers across its spine before placing a new tag beside it. Cold Case Division, 2021 Reinvestigation. Mendoza joined her, leaning on the doorway. "You ready to move on?" "I don't think we ever really move on," she said. "We just carry the stories with us." He smirked. You sound like a teacher. She glanced at him. Maybe I learned from a good one. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, Claire drove across the bridge spanning the James River. The water below shimmered under the fading light, calm and endless. She thought about Mark Evans, how a single act of courage buried by fear had waited 32 years for someone to listen. At the next stoplight, she looked out across the skyline and whispered, "You can rest now, Mark, they finally know." Back at Jefferson High, the last bell of the day echoed through the corridors, sharp and familiar. It carried through the walls, down the stairs, out across the courtyard, just as it had on that final evening in 1989. And in that sound, faint but eternal, lived the echo of a man who believed that truth, no matter how long it sleeps, will always wake again. If you believe every truth deserves a voice, subscribe and stay with us. Stories like Mark's still whisper in towns like ours.